So anyway, we've got way too much competition today to say that we've saved the best for last, but what I'm certain is that we're going to conclude today with a very timely and important topic that hopefully you will leave here inspired to continue this conversation outside these rooms. So go ahead and take the poll results if you haven't done so already, and we're ready to start talking about what Lexington looks like in 25 years, star date 2042, right? Well, obviously there are certain things that we can't possibly know what the future holds in store, but there are some predictions that we can make with some degree of certainty, and that is that the population is going to increase. And based on some projections that you'll see in a little bit, that by 2042, we are going to be right at 400,000 people. That's an additional almost 100,000 people since our last census information. And those additional 100,000 people are going to need about 40,000 new residential units, both owned and rented. We're going to need something like 50,000 or more new jobs, hopefully good jobs and good paying jobs. We're going to need more than a dozen new schools. So how do we get there? How do we get to 2042? We need a master plan that instills vision and discipline. Just like a successful business takes a business plan, we will also need a master plan to get us there that translates our vision and mission into goals and objectives. So let me introduce our distinguished panel real quick, and then we're going to go through some more information, and then we'll come back to them for the question and answer session. So on my immediate left is Todd Denham. He's the Executive Director of Winchester-Clark County Industrial Authority. You do basically Commerce, Lexington, and Winchester, right?
Yes, that's correct, but it only takes one of me.
It only takes one of you, but it takes about 400 of us here. Next up is former Councilwoman Andrea James. She's a co-owner and principal of S&A Strategies, and she's immediately on the heels of a wildly successful On the Table just about a week or two ago. So congratulations on that. We're going to talk more about it here in just a second. Next up is Jim Duncan. He's the Director of Planning for LFUCG. And Susan Speckert is the Executive Director of Fayette Alliance, who has been hugely successful in advocating for sustainable and responsible growth in Lexington for a number of years. So thank you all very much for being here. I'm David O'Neill, your PVA, and it is quite an honor for me to moderate this discussion. So we were talking about how it is that we get from where we are today to 2042 and the need for a master plan. And since 1931, that plan has been our comprehensive plan. It's updated every 5 years, and we're currently working on the 2018 update. It's underway now. Most of you already know that. Hopefully you all participated in an On the Table. So let me quote real quick from an excerpt from a comprehensive plan. The broad purpose of the master plan is to further desirable future development of the community and to contribute to the physical and social well-being of the people. That language reads like it could have been crafted in these rooms today by the progressive and creative minds that we have here with us, but actually that was pulled out of the 1949 comprehensive plan. And in 1949, the most significant economic driver in Lexington was tobacco. That's an industry that's now almost entirely extinct. So how did we get, in 1949, how did we get from an industry that's almost entirely extinct to today where we've got a robust city and simultaneously we were able to preserve almost every bit of that farmland that grew the tobacco? And the answer, of course, is a comprehensive plan. So the comprehensive plan covers a lot of territory, a lot of goals and objectives of what the vision for our city is, but there is one critical component that comes up and is more important some years than it is in others, and this happens to be one of those years, and that concept kind of intersects all the other decisions that need to be made, and that has to do with our urban growth boundary or the urban service area and whether or not it should be expanded. So Lexington was the first city in the country in 1958 to introduce an urban service boundary. And it's designed to to limit growth in a city and keep it within a certain area. So you see here an urban service area, that's where the vast majority of us live. About 95% live in the 54,000 acres of the urban service area. The other 5% of us live in the 125,000 acres of the rural service area. And the boundary between the two limits development and limits growth. Development is allowed in the blue area and not in the green area. And this boundary is how we have preserved the farmland. It's how we have preserved Lexington's brand, how we are seen outside of the city, that we have this fairly progressive college town in our urban core, and then less than a 5-minute drive, you can be in some of the most beautiful rural country setting anywhere in the country. And that is part of what makes Lexington a desirable place to live. That's why businesses and industries may want to relocate here. So the urban service area also has an impact on supply and demand, particularly having to do with the housing market. And it must be managed carefully, and the leaders must be attuned to when the time may come where it has to be expanded. And so that is definitely an issue that's on the table this year. So can we put up the poll results? Did everybody get your poll taken? Did you take the survey? Okay, so the question was, what are the 3 factors that influence you the most when deciding to purchase a house, or what 3 factors influenced your most recent purchase? And the number 1 answer is a specific neighborhood or geographic area, the size of the home, number of bedrooms, number of bathrooms, and which school your children are assigned to. I don't think there's any big surprises there. So hopefully you see now why it's so important that you're participating in this conversation and the decision making on whether or not what the comprehensive plan says, what happens with the urban service boundary, because that can also impact where we develop, what parts of town the neighborhoods will be in. So continue with the conversation after we leave here, and thank you for being engaged in it. So let's go back to the slides. I want to touch on a couple we talked very briefly about some of the economic impacts on the effect on supply and demand, having to do with the real estate market and on affordability. One of the questions on here was having to do with the price. I know anecdotally some people are choosing to live further out in the suburbs. Perhaps they're going to other counties because they can find a larger house, perhaps on a larger lot than they can find in Lexington. So that's what we refer to as affordability, which is different than affordable housing. Affordable housing is also an economic and a social issue that we as a community have to deal with. And for those of you who are curious about what exactly affordable housing means, here is kind of in a nutshell the kind of agreed upon definition, and that's that occupants pay no more than 30% of their gross household income on all housing related costs, including utilities. So to give you a couple of examples, in Lexington, the median household income is right at $50,000, $49,700. So based on this formula, 30% of that means that if you're paying $1,242 or less on housing, then that would be considered affordable housing at an income level of $50,000. On the other hand, keep in mind that a median means half of them are below that and half of them are above that, right? So there are an awful lot of people in Fayette County whose household income is less than $50,000. In fact, 26%, or about 1 in 4, are earning $25,000 or less, which means for their housing to be affordable, they would need to be paying no more than $625 a month. And that's fully burdened, all utilities, everything having to do with keeping a roof over your head. The other issue that we're going to be hearing a lot more about, we're already hearing a lot about it, is gentrification. And again, that's one of those issues that you'll never find the same definition twice. But in a nutshell, again, it means urban renewal, which a lot of times is seen as a positive thing, but urban renewal where wealthier home buyers, not necessarily wealthy, but wealthier home buyers displace poor residents. And some neighborhoods where that is susceptible are generally close to public transportation, close to parks, close to the central business district, and have characteristics that include poverty, minorities, decreasing or low property values, decreasing or low purchase prices. And here's a map where, in my opinion, the yellow shaded areas are the neighborhoods that they're probably at most risk for gentrification, and it's basically north of downtown to Loudon Avenue, Georgetown Street to the west, over to Midland Avenue on the right. And so it's also worth pointing out that the affordable housing and the gentrification issues are kind of interrelated, because the displacement of the people in the neighborhoods that are being gentrified, that is aggravated in a period that we're in now, where we have a clear shortage of affordable housing because they don't have good alternatives for alternative housing. So here's a GIF that is usually pretty popular. This is a snapshot of the city taken every 10 years with the census data. In the upper right-hand corner is the year, and directly below that is the population. The gray area is the urban service area, and then the blue parts that you see is housing as it has developed. So let's move on up to 2025 to 2015. Our current population is about 315,000. Here's some projections out through 2030. If you haven't already heard, you'll probably be hearing a little bit more about a housing demand study that was released last week that many members of the panel participated in. And it projects that in the next 8 years, just by 2025, that our population is going to increase by about 40,000. And to accommodate these additional 40,000 people, we're going to need about 21,000 new homes. And that's rentals and ownership. And according to recent purchasing trends and consumer preferences, about 15,000 of those will need to be single-family detached houses. So if you do the math on that, that's about 1,800 new homes that would need to be constructed per year, and we're currently not operating anywhere near that rate of production. In a good year, we're doing about a third of that. So some people would suggest, and probably true, that even if we started today, given our current rate of production on new houses, we can't capture all the people who would like to be moving to Lexington right now. And based on these numbers, which are also part of the housing study of rates of annual population growth in Fayette and surrounding counties, we probably haven't been doing that for a while now. You can see that Fayette is growing at about 1.2% population per year, but some of the surrounding counties, Scott, for example, is growing at 2.5 times that. And if you drop in the region average, we're just below that. So before really engaging in an educated conversation on how much land we may need, or how much, whether it's for housing or economic development or for schools, we need to know how much land is actually remaining in the urban service area. And you may remember from the slide that I had up on the population projections, it went down to 2030, and the number was 375,000. That's what the Kentucky Data Center and the census predicts that our population will be at by 2030. And that is also the number, 375,000, that was identified in the 2013 comprehensive plan as being the maximum capacity of the urban service area if all the land is absorbed. So here is, and I'm sure that Jim will talk about this a little bit more, but the planning staff has identified a few thousand acres in the urban service area that's either vacant or underutilized that could be used for infill and development. And that's what the yellow shaded area is here. And then if you take out what's shaded in orange here, this is stuff that is either already currently being developed or there's a development plan in place, and that leaves about, is it 5,400 acres, Jim, that you'll talk about still inside the urban service area?
56.
So keep in mind, though, that mostly what we've talked about is land use for residential development. But remember, all of those new people will also need jobs, and they'll also need new schools and other civic uses. So based on how we proportion land absorption, or based on how land absorption has occurred in previous years, for about every acre used for residential development, we need a total of 1.4 acres to also accommodate economic development, jobs, shopping, schools, and such. So let's talk just a second about economic development land needs. So a while back I gave Jenna Greathouse from Commerce Lexington a list of all the properties inside the urban service area that are appropriately zoned for economic development. In those parcels there was about 1,280 acres. And then her staff got together and performed a great deal of due diligence on that list and took out things like the land was too small, or it was in a bad location, or it was too narrow. It wasn't for sale at all. The owner owns the adjacent property and is keeping it for expansion. Took out all the reasons why the land may or may not be suitable for her purposes to try to recruit projects to come to Fayette County, and she was left with 89 acres to work with. And that's 89 acres that the average price is $225,000 an acre in Fayette County compared to $35,000 an acre in surrounding counties. So here's a list of fairly recent projects that were successfully recruited to come to the area. Notice none of them are in Fayette County, and these collectively add up to about $3 million in direct tax dollars to the various counties. So that's the presentation. Let's get to our panel, and since we're talking about economic development land, why don't we go to Todd first. Todd, we talk sometimes about we need more regionalism, and we all need to come together and try to figure out how to grow central Kentucky together. Is that practical, or is every county in competition and everybody in it for themselves?
Well, at the end of the day, we're all in competition, because myself and Jenna and her crew and the surrounding counties, you know, a lot of times we get judged on, well, how many jobs did you create this year? What have you done for me lately? But at the end of the day, it really shouldn't be about competition. People need to quit thinking about county lines. When an industry comes in and says, hey, we need a population of 200,000, well, guess what? Winchester is never going to be on that list. So we work very closely with Commerce Lexington. We have the Bluegrass Alliance. It's the surrounding counties of Fayette. And we do actively recruit and market our region together, because we may have land. We've got a lot more than 89 acres, and it certainly isn't $396,000 an acre. I mean, most communities now, it's become so competitive, they're giving land away. So land is a commodity. I mean, if you do have land, that is very helpful when you're trying to land a project. More Than a Bakery ended up in Woodford County. They needed a 120-acre tract of land. Well, heck, we ran out of a 120-acre tract. So working closely together and helping each other out, it's going to benefit Fayette County. It's going to benefit Clark County. It's going to benefit everyone in the region, because, you know, we're providing workers that come to Lexington. We also, 42% of our workforce comes from East Kentucky. So we're all kind of in this together as part of this region. And if we look at it as a competition, it hurts us in the long run. Because the more industry that we have come here, the better off it's going to be for everyone to spend money in each other's communities.
Thank you. Andrew, congratulations again on a wildly successful On the Table. Why is everybody primed right now and engaged? 10,000 people, if you all haven't heard, 10,000 people showed up at various On the Tables throughout Lexington on the one day. What's going on? How do we harness this enthusiasm? And what's the next opportunity for them to be involved?
Yeah, I think it's a combination of things that are happening from all sectors. So I think from the private sector, it's folks like you all that are rising up to leadership positions, and traditional things that have been done in practices of business and business engagement and community. It's changing, it's evolving. So you may be a little bit more rooted in what's happening now and how what happens downtown or anywhere else affects your business and affects your status. So a lot of the older folks are moving out of leadership, newer folks are moving in, and they're wanting to define things based on place. We're learning how important place is. You all have heard this for years. Rebecca Ryan talked about live where you work concept years ago that we talked about. It's important what the place looks like where we live, and we know that from your demographic, you all will go where is enjoyable to live and what makes you happy. My children would do the same thing. I'm a little bit older than most of you in the room, probably, but I think it's really important, that place. The other thing is I think nonprofit volunteerism and engagement in nonprofits is picking up. Bluegrass Community Foundation, who was one of the leads in this project on the table, they have a database of nonprofits, and those folks are engaging people that normally don't interact with people different from them, are engaging communities where they normally wouldn't be, and they're picking up on things that are happening in other neighborhoods, in other sectors, and they're wanting to be able to do some things about it. And then you've got some things like some downtown developments that are quite controversial to some folks, and there's some differences of opinion. And people are wondering, how do we get to the place where things are allowed to happen, what's going on? And they're realizing it's from engagement, it's from lack of engagement how things happen, and that our voices can make a difference. And they're realizing that the few hundred people, or maybe even 1,000 or so people that have shown up in the past to give their input on things like the comprehensive plan, those people are getting their voices heard. Their voices are creating the goals and objectives that are then forwarded to our council members, whereas what will the planning department do, and what will planning commission do, and what will council members do now that they have over 11,000 voices who have now spoken about what they care about the future of Lexington. So I think that's a lot of it. And it's also, we're seeing neighborhoods where things are, some people would call them gentrifying neighborhoods, but I see neighborhoods where things are turning over, and people are building houses or redoing houses, creating businesses, and they're seeing the challenges that come along with that, and they want to be able to have a voice at the table to transform some of the red tape and some of the complications with that development.
Thank you. So if you have some questions, the Slido app is now open to post your questions or to vote on the ones that are already out there. So please go ahead and get those in. Jim, we talk an awful lot about land, whether it's residential or whether it's economic development land, and in terms of infill. But talk a little bit about, why do we struggle so much for infill? What do we need to do to get developers more interested in doing it? How can we incentivize it? But beyond that, in addition to the land, how do we get people to do more with the existing structures and the underutilized buildings that exist? Why do we generally only talk about land?
Well, David, I think you set the table very well for the discussion about infill. We have essentially, that's been our primary strategy for growth for the past 10 years, even though we still have some greenfield land, particularly on the edge of the urban service area. Infill is really our focus of growth, and we want to ensure that we use these leftover pieces, these underdeveloped pieces, in a way that are purposeful for the community. And as Andrea said, she said there are challenges to doing downtown developments. Well, those same challenges extend to the suburban areas too, particularly when we're talking about going into 20-acre sites or so that have been essentially neighborhood parks for decades, and all of a sudden it's time to develop that for housing or for some other purpose, and then the neighborhoods see that as a threat. So I feel like that the government has reached out over the past 15 years or so in such a way of making infill a much more purposeful process for the community and for the government, primarily by breaking down a lot of the regulatory barriers that existed for infill. And in fact, you can even turn them around and say they're incentives for infill, not just in the downtown area, not just as sort of you think redoing older areas, but throughout the urban area. And I think that's good. What the missing piece really in infill is how do you put a project into an existing neighborhood, an existing area, and make it sensitive to what is already there, and yet still make it purposeful. So not just going in and building more of what is already in the neighborhood, but being respectful, listening to the neighborhood, and looking around at the situation and finding a way to ensure that that new neighborhood you're bringing in is designed in such a way that it helps integrate it. It invites the existing neighborhood to be a part of it, and it makes the new ones coming in feel like a part of it as well. And that piece is still missing. And we've struggled with that in this community for some time, if we're just going to boil it down to talk about regulatory design. We don't do a lot of that outside of a historic district or an individualized neighborhood district. And that's the piece that's missing. And I think if we can do better with that going forward, that will make a developer feel more like that they're ready to make the investment in these neighborhoods. But it will also certainly give the neighborhoods comfort that what's coming in is going to be compatible, it's going to be purposeful, and they're going to be able to integrate it in a much more meaningful way.
Thank you. Susan, I've heard you advocate in the past for wanting a comprehensive infield strategy as part of the comprehensive plan. Do you want to elaborate on that?
Sure, thank you. And thank you all so much for allowing me to speak with you all today. I really applaud all of you. I was asking Jim earlier, what is the cutoff point for being a young professional? Because I still, in my mind, consider myself one. But I don't think I am anymore, sadly. And you know, there's not a good step between young professional and middle-aged. It's like we need something in between there, and I don't know what it is. If somebody can use Sligo or whatever that is, like come up with what's that next step. First of all, Fayette Alliances, we're a land use advocacy organization, and we've been around for 10 years. We were started by a group of people who recognize that Lexington is a really unique place. And I think, you know, I'm not from here, but what I've just witnessed in the past few weeks, Lexingtonians know that this is a really special place. I really applaud all of you and Andrea and the Bluegrass Community Foundation and our government for giving us the opportunity to show up and share our vision and our ideas, because it's our community, and that's really important. We do support infill and redevelopment. That's considered a smart growth strategy. You can look around the nation and do research and know that sprawl does not work. It is not sustainable in the long run, and it's not healthy. So we have done it right here, and we advocate for continuing to do it right. We are growing, which is a good thing. And the challenges that we face are challenges that other communities have faced, and they've figured out how to manage it. One of the things that happened the last time the comp plan was being updated is that the mayor and the council took expansion off the table. So with that issue off the table, what resulted was a complete rewrite of our comprehensive plan that really embraces infill and redevelopment and set us on the path towards creating a more vibrant, mixed-use kind of city where there were walkable areas and the ability to have amenities near where people live and work and the kinds of environments and developments that people are looking for. We have, the other things that happened is we used to have a future land use map, and it was literally a map that said in the future, it identified areas that were going to be designated for certain type of development. That was considered rigid, and I don't question the wisdom of getting rid of the map, but what we don't have now is a comprehensive citywide infill and redevelopment strategy. And I think, you know, I'm very fortunate in what I do. I get to go around and talk to people all the time and talk to neighbors. And one of the things I hear a lot is we just don't know what's going on. You know, we used to have the map and now that's gone, and we never thought that this piece of property would develop, and now it is. So I think, you know, just like in business where you have a long-range plan, we need a long-range growth strategy. We will even if we expand the urban service boundary, all of the issues that we're experiencing with infill and redevelopment are still going to be present. You know, we are always going to have an urban growth boundary. We have a very vibrant, productive agricultural economy here. Our tourism and travel industry, which is exploding, is supported by our landscape. So the balance is really important. And I can tell you one of the things that was really interesting to me when I moved here was, you know, there are so many places in the country where agriculture and agricultural uses and urban uses are in conflict because they're kind of right next to each other. And we have been so smart by clustering the uses So our agricultural uses have thrived, and so have our urban uses. We've been on a path of infill and redevelopment for 20 years, and look what's going on in our city. We have incredible momentum and energy going on downtown, which is really exciting, and I hope that the vision that our leaders have set out for it really comes to fruition, because great cities have great downtowns, and we need our downtown to work. We're now seeing this kind of exciting redevelopment all over inside our city limits. Southland Drive, there's a mixed-use development that's been, I think, approved out Harrodsburg Road, stuff going on in Hamburg. It's really exciting. So what infill and redevelopment does is it drives capital investment inside the city limits and continually improves and reinvests in what we've already built. It's fiscally responsible, it's sustainable, and it's smart. Now, where we are now is we need to do we need to roll up our sleeves and do the hard work to figure out this long-range strategy. There are other communities that have done this, and it takes time. But again, what I've seen in this community in the past few weeks is an absolute eagerness and more than enough ability to do it. So I think that there's the energy now to harness it, to do it in a way that's smart and continues to leverage what makes us special.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Jim, let's drill down just a little bit. And you didn't mention patient capital, my new favorite term. So there's quite a bit of land still inside the urban service area, including several hundred acres that were included in the expansion areas the last time we expanded in 1996 that were specifically designated as economic development land. Other than just market conditions driving up the price to the owner's eventual sale price, what can we do to motivate sellers to come up off some of that land? I've spoken publicly a little bit on the land that's held by Baptist Health on Polo Club out by Costco. That was part of that expansion area as well.
David brings up a very good point. We have several hundred acres of the 5,600 acres of vacant land that have been eligible for development for, in some instances, 30 or 40 years, and they just haven't done so. And it's not that the land is necessarily unproductive or that we don't know who to talk to about the land. In one instance, we have a 900-acre farm.
Tell them whose it is.
It's the Overbrook farm owned by the Young family. A well-known family in this community, and a beautiful farm that Mr. Young created, really, many, many years ago. And that's 900 acres at the end of Tate's Creek Road, out Tate's Creek Road, designated for urban development. And Mr. Young is not ready to develop that yet, but that's really dedicated more for residential, and David was asking about the jobs land. We also have over 300 acres of intact land, about a rectangle's worth, off Newtown Pike, adjacent to the interstate. It's designated for jobs. It's the kind of jobs that you all are trying to get in Clark County. And the owner of that property wants to develop his property, but it feels limited in what is allowed under that particular development scheme, and that was part of the expansion area. So we're trying to work with the property owner, David. He and others have proposed that we sort of loosen the restrictions on that land and enable some other types of development that would augment the jobs land. And that process is going through the Urban County Council right now. It's gone through the Planning Commission, and the council is considering whether to allow other types of development in the jobs area. A little concerned about that, because that means for every acre that comes off of an industrial area that's going to go to a restaurant or to an apartment building is not a job-creating land, is not used for job creation. But we also understand that the business park of the 21st century may be different than it was of the middle 20th century. So we're trying to respond to what the property owners are telling us they need to do in order to make these properties viable. But ultimately, David, we are still at the mercy of the property owner and their willingness to participate in a sale or development, and we don't really have any other way of compelling them to do so. And I think that's an important consideration as we think about whether to expand the urban service boundary and for what purpose, to ensure that any land that we would bring in, if we do so, would be for a purpose that we need right now, that would be well described, and there would be no question that at the time we need that, that land will become available. And that's just not where we are with some of our large property owners right now.
Andrea, I think you wanted to say something.
Yeah, I wanted to add on to that and to give some perspective. When I served on city council, and one of the surprising things to me when I heard complications about development, and as we were trying to address some of the other things, whether it was housing, unemployment, job training, anything, any issue, if it came back to a developer, it seemed like the rules were created in favor of the developer, property owner / developer many times. And I always wondered, how could we ramp up enough enthusiasm and support from the community at large to be able to kind of push that older kind of that policy and that tradition of yielding to developers who are very important, and at one time were extremely important as we're trying to grow our city. They're still very important, but how could we get the momentum to almost demand something different, and that they respond to what our city needs and what we need as residents? I think the energy from On the Table, if everyone would continue to stay involved in what was happening with Imagine Lex and the comprehensive plan and development, I think we could get that. I think in the past, it's been one or two people that have gone to developers and offered ideas, maybe even the chamber, where there's some enthusiasm, but it's still a very exclusive group with the chamber. But if we as a city say, here's what rose up, here's what we heard, and here are the notes, here's what we care about, and here's what's going to answer some of the problems that we have in our city, some of the challenges, and make our city better, I think we may be able to put a little weight on those developers. That's just an observation.
Todd, I think that Fayette County is probably a little bit unique in the region, and that Jenna kind of has to compete with everybody else for land to recruit projects to come here. But don't most other counties have a dedicated business park with land set aside for that purpose?
Yes, most of the ones surrounding here, we do have industrial parks available with land. I've got about 190 acres. Then we have some privately owned land that we're trying to work out and try to develop. But I'm curious, how many of you all in here have worked in an industry or work in an industry now? Raise your hand. Don't be shy. How many of y'all own your own business? Okay, so it's about half and half. So those are your two job creators, and if you're not creating income-producing jobs, it's expensive to build a residential. You got to have water, sewer, gas, electric, and if you don't have the income-producing jobs to help pay for that growth and don't have that tax base, it's going to be very difficult to work with those landowners that want a war pension for their property. So the surrounding counties, we bought 300 acres in 2001 for $4,000 an acre. Today, the property around us is about $40,000 an acre, which it's going up, and we can't afford that either. I mean, we've got some guys that own some land that are very expensive. But again, if you can't figure out how to have that land available for industry, and industry is always going to be there. This is not, dirty industry. These are high-tech jobs. We've got Catalent Pharmaceuticals that soon will have created 500 jobs, average wage of about 56 grand and up. Well, guess what? A lot of those folks live in Lexington. So for Clark County and the surrounding counties, Lexington is a blessing and a curse, because I would love to have the population growth that you guys have here. And I was joking with Mr. Duncan earlier, playing devil's advocate. I hope y'all don't expand the urban service area so we can get some builders in Clark County to start building some homes, because our population, that is hurting us in our growth. It takes away, dollars from our school system and from businesses, and being able to have that quality of life that you guys all love and enjoy here. I spend a lot of money in Lexington, going out to eat and going to places. So we have different challenges than Fayette County does, but so goes Lexington, so goes the rest of us. So you guys need to keep that in mind. When you're involved in your community, you got to think, well, how do we balance what land do we have? We've got to have places, maybe the infill for entrepreneurism, and if somebody comes along and they need to expand, we got to have a place for them to grow and expand to. I mean, look at what happened with Big Ass Fans. I mean, that place has exploded. And so you've got to be able to find that balance. And we're going through our comprehensive plan as well, so it's been interesting for me to be at this conference and hear what all these breakout sessions have been and how that relates to the land use and the gentrification and the infill, because we're doing the same thing in Clark County. But you've got to, in my opinion, if you want to continue to create jobs, you've got to have the land that's affordable and available for industry to locate on. Or you have to say, okay, well then we're going to work as a region and continue to work with our surrounding counties to help them attract those businesses, and we'll take the population growth and the quality of life stuff in Fayette County. So that's a balance.
Thanks. Susan, do you want to say anything specific
Yeah.
on patient capital?
I do, I appreciate that. I think, I want to pick up a little bit on, because I think one of the things that is really important is when you look at really successful communities, they are very intentional about how they grow. And that's where we are right now. So there's no question that our population is growing, which is a good thing. We want a vibrant, exciting, active community. We're growing. I do just want to segue. I mean, I want to go off a little bit and say that what's really important about our population growth is, like the rest of the nation, we're at the beginning of a major demographic shift. So the vast majority of folks that we're going to see increase are age 65 and older. And as people age, if we want them to maintain their independence, we need to create housing where they are able to do that. And so that is lower maintenance housing products that most communities don't have in the quantities that we're going to need it as we look out 10 and 20 years. So our challenge is to see what's coming and plan for it in a smart way. And I think it's the same thing with economic development. The mayor at the State of the City address said that since he was elected, we've created 15,000 jobs here. Since the last comprehensive plan, we've absorbed 11 acres of employment land. So we have among the lowest unemployment, really, I think, in the nation. I think it's 4% in February. So there's no question that we need to be creating jobs, diverse jobs. We want to have shovel-ready land, but we need to plan for that. One thing we talk about all the time is infill, but the other side of that is redevelopment. And we have 5,600 acres of vacant land. There are thousands of additional acres of underutilized land in Fayette County, inside the city limits in Lexington. That is harder to deal with. And what we need to do, again, as I go back to the strategy, we need to be intentional and figure out how to incentivize redevelopment in a way that meets our growth needs so that we can continue to grow smart and grow in a sustainable way. I started at the Fayette Alliance in June, and I had been a supporter of the Fayette Alliance for a long time, but I had never actually looked up a definition of what sustainable growth meant. I just sort of was like, oh yeah, that makes sense. And then I was like, well, I couldn't articulate it. So I looked it up and I wanted to share it. And this comes from, this is a famous report that was done by the UN. And this sustainable development is development that meets the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. And I think that's something that I think about all the time when we're approaching our work, that we want to be sustainable and smart. So we need a plan.
Thank you. So apparently traffic is bad on Nicholasville Road, based on the trending questions that I'm looking at here. So, well, I am personally in favor of something being in the comprehensive plan, a feasibility study on a bus rapid transit system for the Nicholasville Road corridor. So that's my own plug. And above and beyond that, can you talk, Jim, a little bit about what the comprehensive plan is going to encompass in terms of overall transportation, road widening, something for Lexington to help ease the pressures?
In past plans, we have often identified struggling neighborhoods, areas for more targeted study, and we've been successful at doing that. We studied the East End, we studied the Cardinal Valley area, we studied the Windburn area, and then provided a specific path for those neighborhoods to redevelop and for improvement. David, I think we've talked this time in the comprehensive plan, and we've sort of hinted with the Planning Commission, although they'll be making their specific recommendations, that we really would like to focus on corridor redevelopment in this plan. And not necessarily projects that would be done in the next 5 years, but really laying the groundwork for what some of our corridors will look like in the next 50 years. And Nicholasville Road would be ground zero for that. I mean, that's definitely a road that I think, certainly in our, Susan, I'll say our, but you all, certainly in your professional work, we think that you should see a different corridor there in the coming decades. It's something almost like it should really transition in more of a parkway, where we start off with bus rapid transit, 2 lanes of it. We don't widen Nicholasville Road anymore. We actually shrink the driving lanes, but put more intensive transit on it. Eliminate some of the driveways and some of the crossings there, and then make that more of an expressway from downtown to out of town. And then along the way, as to Susan's point, we look at opportunities for redevelopment 1, 2, 3 blocks out from that would accommodate the local traffic and keep it moving. And those are expensive transformations, but they're the kinds of things that we need to get on paper now and start talking about and start moving towards. We start off with bus rapid transit. Well, maybe after that's been successful, the next thing that becomes light rail. And then we keep moving on into the things that larger cities have as part of their transit. And the way to make transit successful, David, is through density. And so we need more people living in more dense situations along these corridors. Nicholasville Road, of course, is the focus, but we also want to look at North New Circle Road and see that was sort of the main street of the 50s and 60s. And how can that be transformed in such a way that it becomes a true neighborhood center for those areas around there? But we also have the Winchester Road corridor, the Tates Creek corridor, all of our corridors, Versailles Road corridor, that needs specified and sort of targeted attention. But that's the sort of thing that we're going to identify, I believe, in this next comprehensive plan for future consideration, not just for the next 5 years, but for the next generation, really.
Thanks. And at nearly every on-the-table conversation, transportation was brought up as a topic. And I see people nodding their heads that they talked about that. And public transportation specifically. And when we ask people, so do you ride the bus? And they would say no. But they have a lot of opinion about how much faster the bus needs to be. We need to ride the bus. We need to ride the bus as professionals so that we can be able to give that specific instance of what happened to us when we rode the bus, and write letters, show up at the meetings, tweet about it, whatever you need to do, call your council person, because that's there are a lot of people that ride it because they have no other choice, and they don't want to do anything to disrupt it because they're afraid that they'll lose the bus stop that they have if they voice too much. So please speak up, take a day at work and say, everybody ride the bus today and let's give your experience, and tweet about that and share that with Commerce Lexington, share it with your council members, and share it with Lexington.
Jim, one of the questions is something that I think that I've mentioned to you before. Is it feasible or practical that we could tie a modest expansion to encourage developers to build more affordable housing inside the urban service area, whether it's a trading of credits or that type of thing? Is that in any way feasible?
In order to get more affordable housing, I think we would look at all possibilities. but we also know what the past has told us about affordable housing. And when we expanded the urban service boundary by 5,300 acres in 1996, we wrote a new incentive into the zoning ordinance that would have allowed developers to increase their maximum density if they would provide a portion of the development for affordable housing, as David defined, something that where you would have to pay no more than 30% and certain other qualifications. 21 years later, not one developer has taken advantage of that bonus that's been offered to them. So I would want to really sharpen our pencils before we started saying we're going to expand the urban service boundary for affordable housing, because so far we haven't seen that has resulted in affordable housing. And but we're open. I think we'd all be open to how that would work. But clearly, affordable housing is going to continue to take a public-private partnership approach, particularly the lowest income residents of our community. And we're going to need to see more investment from the public side to help bring the private sector into the affordable housing development fold.
Probably the most high-profile city that also has an urban service area is Portland, Oregon, and they allow accessory dwelling units. Why don't we?
3 words: the University of Kentucky and the neighborhoods around it, and the impact that the students at UK have had on neighborhoods. I believe that's the biggest fear, is that all of the small houses on Columbia Heights and State Street and those areas would be overrun by accessory dwelling units. We think that's perhaps an overblown fear at this point. There's been a lot of student housing in the private sector built. UK has redeveloped almost all of their on-campus housing, and we think the time has come that accessory dwelling units, whether they're a separate unit on the lot or a converted basement or an addition to the house, we believe that would be an important component to address, as Susan said, the aging population, to provide affordable housing, even maybe an opportunity for the property owners to flip and move into the smaller unit and then rent out the larger unit. So that's something I believe, David, that we would look in this comprehensive plan to try to get some traction on as well.
Is that just a function of zoning?
Yes, right now it's not one residential unit per lot, and that's the zoning issue, yes.
Okay. Well, some people must be ready for Keeneland to open and looking for some betting tips. The number one trending question right now is asking me what the top 3 neighborhoods are. I guess they're wanting to invest some money. So let me answer it this way. And I meant to answer this partially when we were talking about gentrification, is that in my opinion that we are seeing a little bit of a generational shift in preferences and values with your generation. That it seems like that the millennials, my generation, I'm a Generation Xer, was a little, we invented the McMansion, right? We wanted the bigger houses and the bigger yards, and we wanted to be in the suburbs so we'd be next to the bigger malls, whereas the millennial generation appears to want to be in a more urban, diverse, dense, walkable, bikeable community. So having said that, I'm seeing neighborhoods that previously, I've been PVA for 8 years, and I'm seeing neighborhoods now where there was generally very little turnover from one year to the next in terms of the percentage of houses sold, and some of those neighborhoods are now at the top of the list in terms of number of houses sold. And some examples of that would be in the Harrodsburg Road and Clays Mill Road corridor around Pershing and Picadome and Gardenside and Della and Sherrill. That particular neighborhood, the last time I checked about 9 months ago, was the #1 neighborhood in Fayette County just in terms of percentage of homes sold. So it's surprising in ways that you wouldn't expect, and that's also plays into the urban areas near downtown and the gentrification issue. It's part of the stress on gentrification is just the increase in population, but a part of it also is that the younger generation wants to be closer to town, want to be close to the central business district, wants to be close to mass transit. So that's my way of answering your question without getting in too much trouble. So I think that concludes this. Do we want to ask a couple more questions, Amy, or does that wrap us up? We're after 4 o'clock.
Jamie has announcements to wrap us
Okay, so there is now an additional poll. If you'll go back to Slido and go in our session and go to the polls tab, there's an additional poll out there that we're going to give to Chris Woodall and to Jim Duncan to help them with the comprehensive plan. So please go out there and answer the rest of those questions. And I think that's everything. Thank you all very much. I hope you've... Jim, is there anything more that you would like for this group to do to get feedback to the comprehensive plan? Is there an action item you would like for them to leave here with?
We have our website, and we want you to follow that. We have imaginelexington.com, imaginelexington.com. That's the website for the comprehensive plan. We have had surveys posted up there. I think we may be taking that down now, but that's also where meetings will be posted. And we encourage you to participate in the Planning Commission review process over the next 3 months as they develop the goals and objectives. But to a larger issue, David, if I may make a plug, we'd like to see some of you all on the Planning Commission and on the Board of Adjustment.
Yeah.
And it's a big commitment, especially for the Planning Commission. It doesn't pay a dime. It costs you 4 Thursdays a month. But we really, this voice is not represented on the Planning Commission right now. It's a it skews older, and it may be because of the punishing schedule, but we think that this needs to be represented. So I would hope while you're tooling around on the government's website that you'd go to the boards and commissions section and take an interest in being on the Planning Commission, the Board of Adjustment, or some other governing board in the government. It's a good opportunity to have your voice contribute to the decision making for the community.
Or run for office. That's another way to do it.
Anybody else want to plug
No
anything?
takers.
Susan? You got anything to plug real quick before we...
Check out our website. We have a lot of great information on there, fayettaalliance.com. I'm also learning how to do social media. So do all the things that you do. Follow us, like us. But again, I'm just delighted to see so much engagement. I think it's really exciting. I really appreciate the opportunity to be here. And again, to the planning staff and everyone for creating so many opportunities for people to give feedback. I think it's terrific. Thank you.
So we're doing plugs.
Hey, go ahead and plug.
A lot of homes in Winchester. Go to Winchester. Check us out.
Follow me on Twitter, either at Andy Jim in Lex or SA Strategies. We'd love to keep you up on what's going on and what we're working on to engage diverse communities and deeply embed your projects in those communities to make them sustainable.
And if you want to know stuff like, hey, what's that they're building on the corner, follow my Facebook page, the PVA Facebook page.